Thank you very much for the introduction, and good morning, everybody. It's always a little bit daunting to be the first person, because I feel like the first presenter sets the vibe. But luckily enough, I'm really keen on self-testing, so hopefully I will get everybody as excited as I am about it. Okay, so what is the need for a self-test for hepatitis C? Well, as we were discussing, and as we well know, a small minority of people know that they are living with hepatitis C. We've got a huge gap of people who are living with hepatitis C, and yet they do not know their status. Now, we also know that different countries and communities are in different stages along the elimination spectrum. And in many places, it's still at a point where we know that there are groups of people living with hepatitis C that know their status, and we need to get them linked to further testing and cure. And so this is where really important aspects such as 100% of countries allowing non-specialists to prescribe hepatitis C treatment are critical, where decentralized services, one-stop shops, those are the aspects that are going to reach that first group of people who already know their status. But once we advance along the elimination pathway in countries like Egypt and Georgia and Malaysia, and then we start to not be able to find people. And then our next task become, okay, so how can we find these remaining people living with hepatitis C so we can link them to treatment? And really important consideration in this, and that Yvonne Hutton and Margaret Hellard and all of these different groups have shown through costing, is that the costing and difficulties of finding those remaining people is actually going to be the largest burden. It's going to be the biggest price tag of this. So potentially, self-testing can be one of these tools that helps on that elimination journey. Now, WHO had issued the first ever recommendation on hepatitis C self-testing in 2021. And also here I've put a video from Community Voices. And I wanted to echo the, I think, very important thought shared yesterday by Danjuma and Caroline and others, that community engagement is key in this. And we highlight this video because it shows that community perspectives and thinking have been integrated into thinking about self-testing since the very beginning. Some important points about self-testing. So what I'm talking about here is either blood or oral-based self-tests, and they are not here to replace other testing modalities. Specifically, we are talking about antibody testing here, so the first screening test, not confirmation of viremia. And it's not a definitive test, but it's a first step towards learning a status. And the results must be confirmed by the national algorithm, or if there is one, or the standard practices. And it's currently research use only. There are several manufacturers that are putting through now for different levels of stringent regulatory authority approval, including WHO PQ, but none are on the market as of now. So here is a map of just a kind of overview of the different hepatitis C self-testing usability, uptake, and pilots. Now, this is an informal review, and it mostly comes from my colleagues and other members in the WHO Technical Working Group for hepatitis C self-testing. And if anybody here is doing work on self-testing and you don't see it represented, please let me know, because we would love to put it on the map. We just really want to show that there are multiple geographies this is working in and multiple partners working on this. Okay, so can we trust this result? Well, WHO made a recommendation on it, so hopefully yes, but here's the data. So Dr. Pizarro et al. Did a very nice systematic review on, I think, the 6 studies that are published so far on the concordance of a self-test to a professional use test with oral fluid. And so what we see here is that there is high concordance, is the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4th section agreement with retesting, an agreement for rereading the 3rd. So high concordance between a person doing a self-test and a professional reading the results, and a person doing the self-test and a professional doing a professional version of that same test with high concordance and high acceptability. All right, so what about blood? So we have here 2 examples. They are not yet published. Malaysia is under review. Rwanda, we just have to submit the manuscript. But what we see here is even 2 different models of in-person demonstration provided, or only instructions for use provided. And in both groups, we see a high agreement with the professional use test using the blood-based. Okay, but does it increase uptake of testing? To look at this, we did 3 randomized controlled trials with various partners in Georgia, Malaysia, and Pakistan. And I know that many of these results have actually been presented at past IVHEMs, as well as EASLs, APASLs, ASLD, and others. So I won't go into the details. But just to say that our primary objective was to estimate the number and proportion of participants who report completing antibody test, so be it the self-test or the standard of care. And here we've linked to the 3 protocol papers below if you are interested in looking at more of the details of those studies. One thing we saw in Georgia, to take a step back. So these randomized controlled trials, we tried to integrate into existing systems wherever possible. This is because, as we know, funding for hepatitis is a bit limited. And so we wanted to leverage onto those existing systems. In Georgia and Malaysia, we introduced hepatitis C self-testing onto existing online platforms for HIV self-testing distribution. And in Georgia, the country has a really strong massive elimination effort. And what is interesting is that even though they have screened a large majority of their population, still we've reached 38% of people who had never tested for hepatitis C before. Likewise, in Malaysia, they have scaled up their hepatitis decentralized program from 25 clinics to, I believe, over 250 of the around 800 clinics in the country. But still here, we reached 58% of people who had never tested for hepatitis C before. In terms of uptake, the Georgia, it's a 5-arm study, so it's a little complicated, but what we see here is basically the uptake of testing in the various self-testing arms compared to the standard of care that was being referred to the nearest community clinic for professional use RDT. We see an uptake of around 20% increase in the self-testing arm. In Malaysia, we see an even bigger increase. We see a 49% increase in uptake of testing. And I'd also just like to give a shout out to Azra, who has a poster, I think it's number 42, where we look at the cost effectiveness of the Malaysia self-testing. And then in Pakistan, we integrated in hepatitis C self-testing as a secondary distribution method to assist in their very innovative microelimination project. And so here they had a very nice door-to-door model where all care was delivered on site. But what they were finding is 20 to 30% of people were not home during that door-to-door screening because they were at work. So we went back. This was a cluster randomized control. In certain districts, we gave the hepatitis C self-test to the most senior member of the household present for that missed person to get tested. And in the control, we gave them information about where to go for free screening at a facility. And here what we see is enormous. The uptake of self-testing compared to the standard of care was larger than we were expecting. It was so large that we then actually made a crossover group. And of those in the control group who had not yet attended for testing, we went back to them and we gave them a self-test. Well, if they were home, we just tested them right there. But if they weren't, then we gave them a self-test. And in the crossover group, 79% completed self-testing. Okay, but what about really real world? Now, we were just talking about some randomized control, and even though that was integrated into existing systems, we know that there are safeguards and a little bit more efforts. So what happens when we just kind of put this out implementation-wise? These slides were shared with me by Dr. Estrella in NCDC Georgia, and they leverage the lessons learned from that first study I was talking about to look at secondary distribution, leveraging cancer centers or women's health, where women attend for screening. When those women attend for screening, they were provided with self-tests to bring back home to their male members of the household, because the group that Georgia is trying to really find now are middle-aged men. Those are the ones that aren't tested the most. So we thought perhaps by giving the test to the women, they could then distribute it to the household through secondary distribution, and they could get tested for hepatitis C that way. What we see here is that about 50% of the household men actually agreed to take part, and 90% of those reported never having tested for hepatitis C or not knowing. Of those who enrolled, 94% reported test results. And then we also had a questionnaire about acceptability, future use. So we got a good 89% actually completed that as well. And what we see here is that the positive test results were 2.7% with 1.7 undetermined. So this also shows that there still needs to be some guidance, and we need to think through carefully the supportive material that we provide with self-testing. Some general lessons learned is that the model seems to work. There are some difficulties. Not all women were comfortable enrolling in the study. Some women had a language barrier, and I believe this is because they were immigrants from Azerbaijan or Armenia, so they didn't speak Georgian. And I think very importantly, the reporting results was done through an online platform here, and they realized that perhaps using WhatsApp, Viber, regular old telephone may be a more effective way for reporting. So we need to think about differentiated service delivery, even within self-testing. What are the ways to report back that make sense to the communities we are trying to reach? So there are some ongoing pilots that other groups are working on, and they have generously shared some slides with me. One is in India, and so this is Dr. Singh. So he's looking at an uptake study in informal human settlements in India, and he lets me know that the work is almost completed, and so hopefully very soon, maybe in a PASL or some other events, he will be able to present the results of this. Just to say, it's looking at standard of care compared to home-based self-testing compared to facility-based self-testing. Then there's a very interesting work done by Dr. Hugo Pizarro in Brazil. They've done another usability study. This is the same gentleman that did that systematic review, and they're going to be looking at leveraging existing online distribution for hepatitis C self-testing among certain key populations. Everything is ready. We've got all the ethical approvals, and so Dr. Pizarro is hopefully going to be able to start this in 2024. And this is just a flow of the study. So we'll share the slides, and you can review that at your leisure. And then very excitingly, so Unitaid has now funded the STAR coalition. So they've done fantastic work on HIV self-testing for many years. And now they have integrated hepatitis C self-testing into that. And they're in Nigeria, Cameroon, South Africa, India, and Vietnam. And they've got some very interesting preliminary results from several of these countries that I believe that they will be reporting in ICASA and a few other, probably, the one in South Africa, the lab one. Well, anyways, the one in December, it's a big one, and so I'm sure they'll be reporting there as well. But just to highlight some quick results from Nigeria. So they were in Nasarawa State. To point out that Nasarawa has a very high prevalence, 13.2%, so this was higher than the national burden. A caveat, I don't actually know if this is antibody or viremic prevalence, but either way, it's still very high. And what they are doing is an observational cross-sectional implementation study where they're looking at 3 different use cases of hepatitis C self-testing distribution through ARV clinics, through one-stop shops for key populations, and then through referral, so a kind of secondary distribution. And what is interesting here is that we see the uptake in ART clinics. It is higher for women across all age groups. However, for the uptake in the integrated one-stop shop solutions for key populations, we see that the uptake is higher among men, 20 to 34. And also, interestingly, the prevalence, we see here the 50-plus age prevalence. So does this denote an age cohort effect? What's going on here? I think that's just, I wanted to highlight that. So some key takeaways from these studies and pilots. Evidence suggests that hepatitis C self-testing increases uptake of HCV antibody testing 19 to 65% compared to the standard of care. Hepatitis C self-testing enables those who have not previously tested for hepatitis C to do so. And there's considerations of cost. So I mentioned that poster that Azra has. We're doing cost effectiveness analysis on the 3 RCTs. I know that the STAR projects also have a cost effectiveness analysis component, and that's going to be very important because we've got a limited budget. And this is not going to be the silver bullet solution. This is just one tool that we need to employ around a large spectrum, which brings me to my last point, which is we need an investment case to guide short and long-term priorities on the path to elimination. We've got limited funding, and so we need to know when and where self-testing is most impactful. When is it going to be decentralized, one-stop shop service delivery? Where is it going to be mobile outreach? Where is it going to be self-testing? They all have their place, and we just need to know how we can fit it in the limited amount of budget we have. So thank you very much to the collaborators and colleagues and you for your attention today.